if you play Dotscaper, you're behind, read a tweet by pro player and YouTuber PackTCG on February 4th, 2025. Once a common engine choice in Maliss, Dotscaper had vanished from the 4 lists that pushed through the top 16 at YCS Orlando just a few days prior. The card was typically banished off of the effective red ransom, allowing it to special summon itself to the field to extend a combo. It had assisted players in making some of the most costly boss monsters in the deck, which had subsequently been removed from lists that made it that far. It was not a card you wanted to see. It was not a card you wanted to draw. Dotscaper was a Garnet. If you're new to Yu-Gi-Oh!, Garnet is a bit of common jargon in the game. It refers to cards that you have to play for your strategy, but don't want to see in your opening hand.
How many Garnets are there in this deck?
Count them, I don't know, a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. Oh no, there weren't. No, there were 2 Zephyrs. About 16 or so.
16 Garnets?
A third of your deck is Garnet.
What the fuck?
The quintessential Garnet is the card the term is named after, Gem Knight Garnet. Back before Gem Knight was a deck that went second in OTK'd, or went first in FTK'd, it was a deck that didn't really do anything at all. However, it did possess one singular good card, Brilliant Fusion. Brilliant Fusion is a continuous spell that lets you fusion summon using materials from your deck, and if you've played Yu-Gi-Oh! At any time within the last 10 years, you might be familiar with how good of an effect that is. Using Brilliant Fusion to summon Gem Knight Seraphonite got you access to a monster, the ability to send a light monster from your deck to the graveyard, and a second normal summon, which basically made it the best extender you could have for a period of about 5 years. Entire meta-relevant decks were built around it before it got limited in January of 2019 and banned in January of 2020. You might think that Brilliant Fusion is broken, and it certainly is, but it does have a couple of glaring drawbacks. The fusion materials you use with it must come from the deck, so if you draw all of them, you are no longer able to use Brilliant Fusion.
Oh wait, you can't even use the Brilliant Fusion because he drew the Garnet.
Yeah.
60 card deck, he drew the Garnet.
Yeah, he's
games.
got 2 dead cards actually. I don't like his deck building.
This might not be so bad if these cards were decent in their own right and warranted playing multiple copies, so let's take a read of Garnet and...
This card is useless.
For most decks, Garnet is the best card you can play to make Brilliant Fusion work, with other choices only being preferable in specific strategies, and also awful to draw. Brilliant Fusion isn't the only card that worked like this. In the years following 2015, a number of cards were printed and saw meta viability that copied Brilliant Fusion's homework. 3 busted cards you want to play, 1 terrible card that you have to play.
I've seen some posts in Zodiac from casual players that don't understand why people play 3 Brilliant Fusion and 1 Garnet, or a 3-star rotation and 1 Oracle Zephyra, and they're like, why do you want to play cards that are terrible to draw? And one of the things that's really happened in the last year, maybe 2 years of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that we've gotten a ton of powerful cards that require you to play awful cards to compensate for them. And I think that's hilarious. I think that's a cool way to design, I don't want to say broken cards, but powerful cards for sure.
Though the theory behind these risky cards was often debated by casual players, the results didn't lie. Decks playing Garnet to enable strong playmakers achieve top after top after top after top after top. These cards were strong starters, strong extenders, strong disruption, and all played awful cards to make it happen. A couple of these cards even aged gracefully, and we'll get into why that might be, but one thing you might notice is that all of the cards I'm talking about were printed prior to 2018. You might think this is a flavor of the time thing, like how in 2024 Konami really liked monsters in the spell trap zone, and monsters that special summon themselves when searched, and monsters that did both. This isn't really true though, because Garnet heavy packages never really stopped getting printed. After the April 2020 rules revisions, we saw the introduction of stuff like the Dragoon package, DPE, the Adventure engine, the Examina engine, and Silhouette Rabbit. These cards were flashes in the pan, around for a format or two and then gone. You can argue about the conditions around them that enabled their viability, but many of these have been available in formats of late like Master Duel and have not been the correct choices at the highest levels. If people were behind before, they've been catching up. The fall-off in choices like these highlight a general shift in deck-building philosophy that has taken place within the last couple of years. As the quality of engine cards has increased, more space in any deck has to be dedicated to non-engine. Let's take a look at the top 32 deck lists of the last 4 NAWCQs and compare their non-engine counts. This year, decks like Maliss have pushed the envelope for non-engine, with these cards making up 46% of space in deck lists across the total field. In 2024, when 10pi was viable, top 32 decks were 43% non-engine on average, which is higher than 2023 and 2022. Engine-heavy decks similar to For Hire, Plants, or Branded did not crack top 32 at this year's NAWCQ, with the last hint of Memento being eliminated in top 64. Beyond that point, non-engine composed at least 40% of each player's deck minimum. As engines have become more compact and explosive, players need higher numbers of hand traps or board breakers to be able to defeat their opponents. The ideal of opening 1 to 2 hand traps of yesteryear has turned into 2 to 3 today, which puts a heavy incentive to cut any engine pieces you don't need and don't want to draw. In a Twitter thread from January of 2025, YuGiOh streamer and ardent OutOfCharacters fan Peeps YuGiOh discussed how wide the applications this trend in deck building had, ranging from recently meta-relevant strategies like Fiendsmith Kashtira to rogue decks like Shark.
Reevaluating the common consensus around deck lists has been the most engaging experience for me in the modern metagame. I'm playing a Shark list that sets up one Toad, Kragan, Virtue Stream as its end board, and it's more than enough. Shaved all the bricks. I cut Ancient Gear Box from Striker Machine. I'm playing low to the ground and playing impactful non-engine. It feels so good. The cards I'm drawing are usable.
Garnets like Ancient Gear Box can be nice to have to make certain combos more efficient or powerful, but they bring the average quality of your opening hands down. In order to main deck the proper amount of non-engine to be able to play when you go second, these cards are the first to be put on the chopping block. You need to draw cards that either help you combo or stop your opponent, which means even a couple Garnets might be a contributing factor to a deck being rogue when compared to tier 1 strategies. Due to large attendance and extra rounds of Swiss required for 8-person top cuts, players at YCSs are playing more rounds now than ever before. If you play enough rounds, you will draw Garnets, and you will lose matches because of them. One of the biggest changes wrought by modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is this need for consistency. Though there are a variety of traits you can use to judge decks in Yu-Gi-Oh!, 2 of the most important are consistency and power. The height of power in Yu-Gi-Oh!, the first turn kill or FTK, has been in the game for over 20 years now. The prevalence of one-card combos and cards that double as starters and extenders are not power creep, but consistency creep. Increased consistency allows decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! To play through more and more low-impact disruption, with cards that were turn-ending in years past merely becoming a nuisance to decks today. Creep in consistency thus requires higher counts of non-engine to attempt to put a stop to these combos. This creates a bit of a vicious cycle, with new cards and archetypes being designed with even greater consistency to accommodate these high hand trap counts. This pattern squeezes out any card that is not absolutely necessary for the engine or the non-engine, making Garnets way more of a drawback now than they might have been in years past. Dot Scaper was not the only Garnet in Maliss. Alliance Insight, dropping at the beginning of May for the TCG, introduced quite a bit of powerful support for the deck in the form of 2 new main deck cards, as well as Backup, Wizard, and Allied Code Talker at Ignister. These cards added extension, consistency, and endboard pieces to the Maliss deck that it did not have before, solidifying its tier 1 status in a higher powered format. When these cards were sleeved up, something had to be put in the binder, and which cards those would be became clear following YCS Providence just a few days later. Most lists that made Top Cut had cut Maliss Code TB11, the new Allied Code Talker, and opted to side deck Maliss Code GWC06. These decisions were made in private testing circles, and Jibriel Braithwaite from Team JNC made it to top 8 piloting a list like this. Pack, a testing partner of his, made another tweet that received a bit of attention.
You're behind? No, I'm not. I don't play Dot Scraper.
I'm sorry, man. You're behind.
This guy's behind, chat. He's behind, bro. What the fuck?
Guys, if you play Dot Scraper, you're behind, man.
Man, if you're not on Deep Sweeper, you're behind.
Yeah, if you're not on Deep Sweeper, you're behind.
You're behind.
You're behind.
If you main GWC, you're behind. If you play A Code Talker, you're lost. This is not a video about monetized spreadsheets, and Pack wrote up an apology about the whole situation, so I won't waste any more time by digging up the drama today. However, what I do think is interesting is that these changes didn't exactly stick. By July, everyone was behind and lost because Allied Code Talker was back in extra decks, and for many, GWC06 was in the main.
So here comes that GWC. I think most players have been running it this weekend. There was a big discussion, I think, as to whether you still needed to run it. Now you had all the other tools available to you, and I feel like for a brief period of time everyone had decided not to run it, but now everyone's decided to put it back in again.
Of course, as metagames develop and new sets release, individual cards often enter and leave decks, but for Maliss, the consensus became that these cards were worthwhile to have. There are a variety of factors that could have contributed to this backslide. Maliss was often oversighted against at Providence due to it being highly feared. As this was corrected, pilots could afford to cut cards like Nightmare Cerberus in favor of Allied Code Talker. With Bestials on the rise in Maliss, GWC was a nice extender and important to keep crucial engine pieces like White Binder in rotation. Or, as Aditya Darap so eloquently put it,
Do not cut this card. I have nothing to say, just don't cut it.
in my opinion, a reason these cards wormed their way back into decks is because there is a limit to the amount of engine cards you can cut. Let's compare Aditya's deck at the NAWCQ to another talented Maliss player who had an honestly phenomenal year, Lucas Sacco. Lucas ended the 2024-2025 season with 5 YCS tops, including a top 8 finish at YCS Providence, which qualified him for the Worlds Points playoffs. For those unaware, 2 of the people that attended Worlds from North America achieved their spot in a 16-person bracket, composed of those who earned the most points from topping high-level events during the year. Win just 3 matches, and you're headed to Worlds, baby. In this event, Lucas picked this deck list, which was by no means standard. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. The best decks at tournaments often aren't standard. Lucas's deck opted to play a frankly unprecedented amount of non-engine, shaving cards like the 3rd copies of Backup Adagnister and Marchhair for a whopping 23 total hand traps. GWC is not in this deck, main or side. Most controversially, the spell Malice in the Mirror is nowhere to be found, widely considered a one-of by most players. These last 2 cards are Garnets. They don't do anything on their own, and it makes sense to see them as optional when trying to include as much non-engine as you can when building a deck. Lucas made a reflection video on his performance in the points playoffs, and in it he goes over Game 2 of the first round of the tournament. Down a game and playing for his tournament life, his opponent both Lancias and Perulias him, making it difficult to put up disruption. He is able to make it to the classic Maliss half-board of Red Ransom Pass, but it puts him in a sticky situation. Maliss is an explosive deck. If Lucas can survive his opponent's turn, he has enough engine cards in rotation that he might be able to win even after facing down his deck's strongest counter in Lancia. However, he is not playing Malice in the Mirror, a card you would almost always search off of Red Ransom in this situation. His opponent, Nate Shimada, opens a copy of Exed Ryziel, allowing him to force out one of Lucas's spell traps early. Actually having Malice in the Mirror here could have at least denied his opponent the search off of Exed after it ate the Valen pop. Lucas desperately needed disruptions, and he just couldn't access enough of them here to save himself from losing this game. There are a variety of factors that contributed to Lucas's loss, and I definitely don't have the credentials that he does to analyze them properly, so I recommend checking out his video. Lucas playing Maliss in the Mirror would have resulted in a completely different game down to the hands he might have drawn, and his opponent's hand even contained an unknown card that could have complicated the situation further. However, I do think this extreme approach to Maliss was a problem for him at the NAWCQ. At the end of the video, he says this.
What I will do better is I will definitely take a look at the decks that I'm going to play going forward, and I think that I need to play higher engine count decks. I think that if a better player has more engine, there's a better chance they break the board, even if the board is stronger, than trying to like nickel and dime the opponent to death with hand traps. I think that playing a larger engine would have been better for me for this event, or at least for the main event.
This fable illustrates the dangers of going too far. It can be good to cut Garnets, but for your deck to be able to perform properly going first, it still needs to be able to disrupt your opponent enough. If one side of the spectrum is consistency, the other side is power. Directly cutting Garnets like Maliss in the Mirror to benefit your consistency or increase your non-engine count can create a deck that is less powerful, which will also result in losing games that were potentially winnable. What makes deck building in Yu-Gi-Oh! So unbelievably interesting, even in Tier 0 formats, is this push and pull of consistency and power. As weird as it sounds given the game's reputation, building your deck to kill your opponent into the sun just isn't optimal in Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks built to make these sorts of boards are the embodiment of win more. Ideally, you only need enough disruptions to stop your opponent from playing, and each extra disruption is a card that is potentially cuttable to make your deck more consistent or versatile. However, that minimum number of disruptions is usually unclear, so when deck building you have to do your best to figure it out. It changes from format to format, matchup to matchup, game to game. These ideas directly dictate tweaks in card ratios to give players incremental advantages, and it's something that is very important to pay attention to when reviewing the current metagame or constructing your deck for an event. If you look for it in tournament results, you'll always see fluctuations, and these are a product of people playing with these thoughts, whether they know it or not. It's very easy to take this information at face value and extrapolate on it based on current trends. Maybe next year, every deck at the NAWCQ will be 60% non-engine. Maybe Gamma will someday return to 3 because of the act of playing a deck with sci-frame driver is too unpalatable. However, what's important to understand is that these trends are responses to shifts made in card design. Though large non-engine counts were common at this past year's NAWCQ, certain engines like Vanquish Soul, Draco Tail, and K9 in the post-Justice Hunters format buck them by offering more powerful in-engine plays on the opponent's turn, supplanting the need for hand traps. Archetypes on the horizon like Cool Tune show this idea might turn into a regular design staple, reducing the need for heavy non-engine. Despite how nebulous this all is, I want to think there will always be a place for Garnets required by cards that do something valuable that no other card can do. Maliss in the Mirror is the only useful search target off of Red Ransom when you've been Lancia'd. Gamma and Delta were popular choices for certain decks at the NAWCQ to negate cards like Banished Maliss Monsters and Mitsurugi Ritual. While I was working on this essay, I became very curious about Silhouette Rabbit, which is a card that uses a Garnet and has been out of the format for a while. It's a negate and a spell trap pop. It never stopped being that just because everyone's Snake Eyes cards are now in a binder somewhere. Silhouette Rabbit hasn't seen a high play rate in the TCG since the death of the snakes last December, and it's kind of crazy considering it's a Link 2 that can put up 2 disruptions. That's arguably a better endboard piece than SP Little Knight, which has seen near ubiquitous play for the last 2 years. So, where did Rabbit go in 2025? The answer on the surface seems obvious. Garnets are bad. This card is bad going second. This card is bad going second. Silhouette Rabbit is bad. This isn't the full picture though, because in Snake Eyes format these cards are still bad going second. So why was Rabbit viable in the first place? I hit up 3 competitive players that I thought might respond to my Discord DMs: Eva Lees, Joshua Schmidt, and Dan Parker. Eva had a very nuanced take on it, citing certain interactions in the format that made the card useful in Snake Eye.
It was a good card for Snake Eye's decks because Rabbit could pop the Tenpai field spell, which was very important in that format. It could also be used as a breaker playing into boards due to Snake Eye's Diabellstar summoning, and it was kind of the second best thing you could do with 2 bodies if you already had Masquerena in the tank. You're able to make this thing that gives you a trap, that gives you a summon negate, and also spell trap pop. It's pretty decent value.
Josh had other things to say on it.
I think Silhouette Rabbit's main issue is the fact you have to play a main deck trap for it, which isn't ideal, and I think people are only willing to do this if absolutely necessary. Feels like Snake Eyes had ways of handling this just by pitching the trap for Diabellstar or Nightmare Phoenix when going second.
Dan chalked it up to this common and pivotal interaction.
The only way for the opponent to synchro summon into Azaroon was to chain 2 Tenpai monsters together. However, the synchro monsters Trident Dragon and Black Rose Dragon would unfortunately miss timing due to their own Tenpai monster effects, and if they try to kill the statue in battle, it would take down its attacker with it.
In 2024, Silhouette Rabbit served a niche. It was an important end board piece. It was played in a deck that focused on summoning generic links that already made use of its 2 biggest competitors and hungered for more. It was a hard counter to one of the best decks in the format, but useful against many others. It required a Garnet, but the engine you played it in had ways to deal with bad draws natively. It synergized with mechanics that summoned monsters from the spell and trap zone. All of these reasons made Rabbit and its corresponding brick worth playing, until the deck that accommodated it was obliterated. Now, 9 months later, things are changing again. Unlike during Nat's format, Justice Hunters has important field spells with ignition effects, making them worth popping as Disruption, a chain link after they are activated. In decks like Yummy, board breakers are incredibly common. Rabbit can pop these field spells, or negate some of these board breakers through the use of Apophis the Swamp Deity. For a deck like K9 Crystron that already plays a valuable continuous trap as part of the engine and has link material to spare, Rabbit is an appealing option to side deck. YuGiOh is endlessly inventive. As the game changes, players will write laws, start trends, and promptly abandon them as new cards and ideas recontextualize how people approach the game. I shudder to imagine a stale YuGiOh, because even in its darkest chapters, that is something it has never been. With that, I am out of characters, so I guess this is the end. It was honestly a lot of pressure to put out something worthwhile after my last video, so if you enjoyed this one, I would really appreciate it if you liked it and shared it with someone. Thanks to Eva Lees, Peeps, Mark the Page, Joshua Schmidt, and especially Dan from YuGiOh Organization for their important contributions to this essay. I've posted links to where you can find them in the description. Also, a massive thanks to my patrons, including Dan Parker, Drumstep, MBT YuGiOh, and Ray. Support on Patreon is what makes putting together videos like this much more justifiable for me, so if you want to help my work beyond just a like or subscription, you know where to go. Be well, until next time.
Okay, now here's the line again in my horribly botched attempt at Josh's German accent. I'm so sorry to all of our German viewers. I got to lower my voice, not be a tiny gay child anymore. I'm a normal person with a normal person deep voice.